The Dancing Plague of 1518. Dear passengers, this is your captain speaking. Today's journey will take approximately 20 minutes. Please fasten your seat belts and enjoy the ride. Years ago, when the calendar showed July of 1518, a strange event took place in Strasbourg, on the other side of the world. Hundreds of people, as if bound by an unspoken agreement, danced non-stop for weeks, and some of them died from exhaustion or heart attacks. It was a mysterious case of mass hysteria. As always, today we will take a closer look at one of history's strangest, most disturbing, and, ironically, the most rhythmic tragedies, the Dancing Plague of Strasbourg in 1518. If you are ready, let us descend into the depths of dusty archives and examine how this deadly dance began. The woman who sparked the flame, Frau Trophäa. It all began on a hot day in July 1518, on the streets of Strasbourg. A woman named Frau Trophäa suddenly stepped outside and began dancing wildly, even though there was no music at all. Since she had not been drinking alcohol, there had to be something strange going on. This was not a simple dance of joy. There was not even a smile on her face. It was as if an invisible force was pulling her strings, moving her like a puppet. Frau Trophäa did not stop for an entire week. She kept dancing until her feet were covered in blood and wounds. By the end of the first week, 30 more people had joined her. As if happiness dust had been scattered, within a month the number suddenly reached 400. The people of the city seemed to have gone mad. The reaction of the authorities at the time, the city council and doctors, turned the situation from a tragedy into an absurd theater play. While these events were unfolding, doctors decided that this was not a supernatural phenomenon, but a disease called hot blood. If only they had listened to their patients. The doctor's prescribed remedy was this: if they release this energy by dancing, they will recover. The city administration turned guild halls into dance floors, hired musicians, and even appointed professional dancers to keep those who collapsed from exhaustion on their feet. A job opportunity for anyone seeking extra income. And what happened next? This decision was like pouring gasoline on a fire. The crowds grew, and those who could not keep up began to die in the streets from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion. It is said that as many as 15 people died each day. Why was this event described as absurd, do you know? When we examine this incident from a modern perspective, 3 main theories emerge. The first is ergotism, rye ergot poisoning. Ergot, a type of fungus that grows on damp rye, contains chemicals that are the raw materials of LSD. People may have unknowingly eaten hallucinogenic bread. However, ergotism usually causes tremors, and it falls short of explaining weeks of coordinated dancing. The second theory is the curse of Saint Vitus. According to medieval belief, Saint Vitus punished those who disrespected him by making them dance. This religious fear may have triggered a wave of mass hysteria. And finally, mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria, which is considered the strongest theory to date. Strasbourg in 1518 was struggling with famine, smallpox, syphilis, and heavy taxation. People were under such extreme stress that their minds reached a breaking point. What Frau Trophäa started was a collective trance, a psychological defense mechanism of a desperate population. A friendly warning: try not to let economic troubles weigh too heavily on your own mind. When we look at the historical consequences of this outbreak of hysteria, it becomes clear that it did not remain merely a strange story. It left significant marks on history. This plague demonstrated the failure of the Church's exorcism practices and the helplessness of the primitive medicine of the era. It became one of the first serious observations in medical history regarding the physical manifestations of mental illnesses. It also revealed the state's inability to control public behavior. Otherwise, would people have danced wildly in the streets? Laws and soldiers proved ineffective against a dancing crowd. Moreover, these events left such a deep impression on the people of Strasbourg that the theme of the Dance of Death, Danse Macabre, in European art and literature was strengthened and fueled by this and similar incidents. The lesson to be drawn from these events is clear. The dancing plague of 1518 stands as one of the most extreme examples of how fragile and, at the same time, how unpredictable the human mind can be under intense pressure. What is truly absurd is not the dance itself, but the rhythmic response of the human spirit to suffering, and the fact that the authorities of the time mistook this suffering for a treatment and actively fueled it. Today we call this hysteria, but on the streets of Strasbourg at that time, it was an endless, blood-soaked nightmare. Dear friends, we will continue exploring such absurd yet true events. Our next stop, the War of the Buckets.
The year is 1325. The place is Italy. Now, you might say, can a war really break out over a bucket? Yes, believe it or not, and not just any war, but one in which thousands of people died. This was a real war, fought between the cities of Modena and Bologna, sparked by the theft of a simple wooden bucket, and it resulted in the deaths of thousands. This time, human pride overpowered reason, and events escalated in completely unpredictable ways. We should not look at this incident as merely a wooden bucket. This absurd war began in the middle of a long-standing sectarian blood feud. Let me start with the most crucial point of the story. As I said before, this war did not break out only because of a bucket. At the time, Italy was divided into two rival factions, the Guelphs, supporters of the Pope, and the Ghibellines, supporters of the Holy Roman Emperor. Bologna was the stronghold of the Pope, while Modena was a loyal city of the Emperor. In other words, there was a centuries-old blood feud and deep sectarian hatred at play, driven by a childish, my father can beat up your father mentality. The bucket was merely the match thrown into a barrel of gunpowder ready to explode. The beginning of the incident. One night in 1325, a small group of Modenese soldiers infiltrated Bologna. From a well in the city center, they stole an ordinary oak wood bucket used to draw water. But the issue was never about water or the bucket itself. The real point was to slip right under Bologna's nose and mock them. When the Modenese took the bucket back to their city and displayed it like a trophy, the people of Bologna turned the matter into an issue of national honor.
Hand over the bucket, or there will be war. Speaking from a position of authority, the leadership of Bologna issued an official notice demanding the return of the bucket. Modena, however, rejected this demand with laughter. What sounds humorous to us today was perceived at the time, within the culture of chivalry and city honor, as a grave humiliation. Determined to restore its honor, Bologna assembled a massive army of 30,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. Facing them was a Modena force of only 7,000 men. This confrontation went down in history as the Battle of Zappolino. And this is where the story reaches its most tragic point. On November 15th, 1325, near sunset, the two armies met at Zappolino. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Modena army attacked with strategic brilliance and sheer fury, routing the Bologna forces. In just a few hours, approximately 2,000 soldiers were killed. Think about it. 2,000 lives were wasted over a kitchen utensil. But the absurdity did not stop there. It escalated to an almost unbelievable peak. Going to retrieve one bucket and ending up losing a second one is beyond absurd. The Modena army chased the fleeing Bolognese all the way to the city walls. Instead of laying siege to or losing the city, they took a victory lap in front of Bologna's fortifications, and then stole a second bucket from another well outside the city before returning home. This act stands as one of the greatest displays of humiliation in recorded history.
In the end, Modena emerged victorious, and the bucket remained in their possession. This war shifted the balance of power among the Italian city-states and solidified Modena's position within the Ghibelline alliance. More importantly, the incident entered Italian literature as an epic satirical poem titled La Secchia Rapita, The Stolen Bucket, becoming a foundational work in Europe's tradition of so-called absurd wars. Would you believe me if I told you this stubbornness still continues today? Here is the most unbelievable part of the story. The bucket is still in Modena. The original wooden bucket stolen 700 years ago is currently on display in the Ghirlandina Tower in Modena. Bologna, meanwhile, has still not gotten its bucket back. The other side continues to sulk and complain to this day.
The lesson to be drawn from this war is clear. The War of the Bucket stands as one of the harshest lessons history has to offer. When human communities become blindly devoted to an ideology or a symbol, the material value of that symbol, whether a bucket, a flag, or a piece of rock, becomes completely irrelevant. Wars are rarely fought for tangible gains. They are fought to repair wounded egos. The blood of 2,000 people remains, metaphorically, dried upon an old wooden object now hanging in a tower. So, take this as a warning. Do not set your sights on your neighbor's bucket. To our valued passengers who stayed with us throughout this journey, your support of the channel and alike would truly make me very happy.
Liechtenstein sent 80 soldiers to the Austro-Prussian War. When the war ended, they returned home as 81 people. Not only did they suffer no casualties, but an Italian soldier they met along the way, who became friends with them, joined the group and eventually settled in Liechtenstein. Today, we will examine what is perhaps the most gentle and absurd incident in military history, an event that lands like an ironic slap across the bloody cold face of war, pulled from the dusty shelves of history. Our journey into the past takes us to the year 1866. Europe reeks of gunpowder. Empires are shaking, yet a microstate steps onto the stage, completely overturning the logic of war and even the laws of statistics. Here is an in-depth look at Liechtenstein's 80+1 army.
On the geopolitical chessboard, a pawn may be small, but it is still functional. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866, also known as the 7 Weeks' War, was a struggle for leadership within the German Confederation. Liebenstein had little choice but to remain loyal to its powerful neighbor, Austria, largely out of fear, it must be said. Prince Johann II, fulfilling the Confederation's obligations, assembled a purely symbolic unit, 80 soldiers and 1 officer. Their mission was to hold the Brenner Pass and prevent Italian forces from infiltrating Austrian territory in the Tyrol region.
Calling it a front line would actually be misleading. By the standards of the time, it was more like a vacation, practically the most peaceful corner of the war. This group of 80 men was not sent to the bloodiest battlefields, but to a mountainous region with postcard-worthy scenery resembling the Swiss Alps. They never engaged in direct combat with the Italian army. Everything was calm and quiet. Their days were spent breathing fresh mountain air, drinking beer, and most likely taking turns sleeping on watch, along with a fair amount of gossip. And this is where the historical absurdity truly begins. They were in the middle of a war, yet the bullets were not flying over their heads, but passing very far away. One can't help but wonder, might they have run into Heidi and her grandfather in those mountains?
The negative casualty paradox. Sending 80, returning with 81. What kind of math is this? When the war ended, with Prussia victorious and Austria defeated, the Liechtenstein unit set off for home. Once the head count was taken, the result was one of the funniest statistics in military history. 80 went out, 81 came back. Yes, you heard that correctly. It happened exactly like that. In a normal war, you expect to suffer losses, right? Not this time. In a miraculous war, you suffer no losses. In a Liechtenstein-style war, you actually deign a person.
So who was this 81st person, and why did this discrepancy exist? Come on, let's see the guesses. Hands in your pockets. Although historians propose different theories about this uninvited guest, the most widely accepted one is this. He was an Italian soldier who had deserted his unit or become separated from it and happened to encounter this cheerful, peaceful group along the way. Some sources claim he was an Austrian liaison officer, but popular history prefers the Italian friend version. There's no point in making new enemies for no reason. The man liked the friendliness of the Liechtenstein soldiers, and most likely their cheese and beer, so much that he joined what was technically supposed to be the enemy and crossed the border with them.
Why is this so absurd? Contrary to the nature of war, war is an art of subtraction. In this case, however, there was an actual increase. Not a logistical error, and certainly not a miracle. It was a choice. The Liechtenstein army presented such a non-threatening posture that an enemy soldier chose not to fire at them, but to grow old with them as a friend instead. The discipline paradox. In modern armies, allowing an unknown person to join your unit and enter your country would be a serious offense. For Liechtenstein, however, it was simply a friend picked up along the way.
Looking at the historical process, the consequences brought about a major purge. This incident became a turning point for Liechtenstein. After the war, Prince Johann II concluded that an army was an unnecessary and costly burden. Why bother with an army? Eat, drink, sleep, that's the life. The decision to abolish the army was made in 1868, completely dissolving the Liechtenstein armed forces and declaring neutrality. No more wars, bring on the beer. As for today, Liechtenstein still has no army. They remain the last state in history to complete what may be the most successful military operation of all time, without killing anyone, and by gaining a friend. Hey friends, getting bored? But we were just getting started. Just kidding, we're beginning our descent. Please return your seats to the upright position. Liechtenstein's 1866 campaign is proof that history can be chaotic yet deeply humane. The 81st man is not merely a statistic, he is a quiet laugh thrown in the face of nationalism and the absurdity of war. Sometimes the best way to go to war is to make new friends along the way and return home safely.